All right, let's talk about something really important for every single pet owner out there. That tiny lump you might find on your dog. Because, there's a very specific moment in the life of a tumor that can completely change your pet's future. And really understanding it is the key to getting the best possible outcome.
It's a phrase veterinarians hear all the time. A worried owner comes in and they say, "When I first found it, it was tiny. Seriously, just the size of a grain of rice." This super common, totally relatable observation is usually just the beginning of a much bigger story, one that has a critical turning point.
So what's the big deal about a tiny little lump? Well, the entire journey of a tumor really boils down to this one shift. What starts out as a small, contained, local problem can turn into a systemic, body-wide disease. And stopping that from happening, that is the single most powerful thing we can do in cancer treatment.
Okay, so let's zoom in on that tiny lump. On the surface, it seems harmless, right? It's just sitting there. But what's actually going on underneath at a biological level? Well, there's a hidden process at work.
See, when a tumor first gets going, it's just a small collection of mutated cells. It's basically in a dormant state, a little isolated cluster that hasn't really plugged into the body's systems yet. And I mean, we are talking incredibly small. This dormant tumor is often only 1 to 2 millimeters across. And here's the crucial part. At this stage, it has no blood supply of its own. It's just there, waiting. But then, something happens. A kind of biological switch gets flipped. This right here, this is the turning point, the single event that decides whether that little lump stays a minor issue or becomes a major, life-threatening problem. And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What makes that seemingly stable, tiny group of cells suddenly wake up and start growing like crazy? Well, the answer is a process called angiogenesis. The angiogenesis switch is that exact moment when a tumor basically hijacks the body. It sends out these chemical signals that, believe it or not, command the body to build it its very own, dedicated supply line of new blood vessels. So how does this actually work? The best way to think about it is to picture that tiny tumor like a seed that's just sitting in the soil. For that seed to grow, it needs to sprout roots to pull in water and nutrients. That's exactly what angiogenesis is, the tumor growing its own roots right into the body's circulatory system. And look, this isn't just some made-up idea. This is real science, pioneered by a brilliant biologist named Dr. Judah Folkman. His amazing research is what showed us how tumors create their own blood supply, and it totally changed how we think about fighting cancer.
You can really break it down into 5 steps. First, you've got the dormant, isolated tumor. Then, boom, the switch gets flipped on. Next, the tumor starts growing its roots, those new blood vessels. After that comes the feeding. It starts sucking up oxygen and nutrients from the blood. And finally, once it has that fuel, it can grow explosively, and crucially, it can now spread.
And at the end of the day, it's really that straightforward. Just like any living tissue, for a tumor to get bigger, it needs 2 basic things delivered by the blood: oxygen and nutrients. By building its own pipeline, it gets an unlimited supply of both.
So once that pipeline is built, the tumor isn't on a deserted island anymore. It's plugged right into the body's main superhighway, the bloodstream. And that is when everything takes a turn for the worse.
This is it. This is the critical transformation we've been talking about. The moment those vascular roots take hold, the whole nature of the disease shifts from being a local issue to a systemic one.
And plugging into the bloodstream leads to 2 pretty devastating outcomes. First, with all that fuel, the original tumor can now grow at a terrifying speed. And second, the bloodstream becomes an escape route. Cancer cells can break off, hop into the highway, and start new tumors in other parts of the body. We call that metastasis.
And a really common place for these runaway cancer cells to end up is the lungs. This is exactly how a tumor that started out on the skin, for example, can become a life-threatening problem deep inside the chest.
Okay, I know that all sounds pretty scary, and it's easy to feel a little powerless. But here's the good news. There is a clear strategy, and it all revolves around grabbing that critical window of opportunity before that angiogenesis switch gets flipped. So we're back to this fundamental difference. As long as the cancer is just a local problem, a seed without roots, it is so much easier to treat. Once it becomes a systemic disease, the fight gets exponentially harder. The choice is pretty clear. And that right there is the most important thing to take away from all of this. The entire strategy, the whole game plan, is to get that seed out of there before it ever gets the chance to build a blood supply and grow its roots. Remember that number we talked about? 1 to 2 millimeters? That's the size of the tumor when it's still in that dormant prevascular state. That is your golden window of opportunity.
Acting the moment a lump is found, no matter how ridiculously small it seems, is the most powerful move you can possibly make.
So let's end on this thought. When you find a small lump on your pet, the most important turning point isn't when it gets bigger or when it looks different. It's that silent, invisible switch from a local problem to a systemic one. And that is the turning point you simply cannot afford to miss.